You're all very welcome to this Get Brexit Ready with AIB event. When we think about 2020, it has been such a difficult and extraordinary year, and it's not over yet. But in a way, 2019 already seems like a long time ago. We're using different vocabulary, different words like lockdown or cocoon we hardly used at all. A year ago, Golfgate was something you went through when you were going to a driving range. And of course, a year ago, none of us had ever heard of the Four Seasons Total Landscaping Garden Centre in Philadelphia either. But despite the risks and uncertainties that these very tangible problems have thrown up for business, there is another risk and another uncertainty that has been bubbling away there for 4.5 years, and that's Brexit. And that has been since the June 2016 Brexit referendum result. And that's what we're going to talk about today. We're not going to talk about the past or the last 4.5 years. We're going to talk about the present and what businesses can still do to prepare themselves for Brexit as that deadline approaches. And we're going to talk a little bit about the future and what way that might look and what way it might shape up for businesses and the challenges that that may involve. We have 2 panel discussions in our session today, and I do hope that you will stay and join us for both of them. So in our first discussion, I'm delighted to be joined by Simon Coveney, Minister for Foreign Affairs and Defence, and here in studio by Catherine Moroney, who is AIB's Head of Business Banking Market, and by live link we're joined by IBEC CEO Danny McCoy and by Chambers Ireland CEO Ian Talbot. You're all very welcome. If I could go to you first, Minister Simon Coveney. When we look at the Brexit situation, the talks and negotiations, do you think we will see an EU-UK trade deal, or are we still poised for the possibility of a no-deal crash-out?
Well, I mean, I have said for some time that I think if pushed on this question, I think there will be a deal, but it is quite possible that there won't be. But I think that the cost, both politically and economically for the UK, of not doing a deal, that applies to Ireland as well, by the way, but the cost to the UK of not doing a deal, I think, is very significant. And so I do believe there will be a deal at the end of this tortuous, difficult process. So I've summed this up as very difficult to close out, but certainly doable. And what we're seeing at the moment is the 2 negotiating teams very tight-lipped in terms of public comment, which is a good sign, but briefing the people who need to be briefed. That there is progress being made, but it's still very, very slow in certain areas. And the 2 big outstanding issues still, which haven't really made progress this week in any sense, to date anyway, are the level playing field issue, as the EU will call it, which essentially is trying to get agreement around clear principles of fair competition between the 2 economies for the future, and then having a governance arrangement that can deal with disputes that occur linked to that in the future in a way that's independent and robust and can allow for action to be taken quickly. I think that would provide a lot of reassurance on the EU side. And quite frankly, without that kind of agreement on a level playing field and fair competition, there won't be the foundation stone necessary for a free trade agreement that avoids tariffs and quotas. There's no way the EU will sign up to an agreement that would allow a future British government to derive competitive advantage for its own businesses by targeting state aid in a way that goes way beyond what the EU is allowed to do, or indeed in other areas as well. So that issue is fundamental, in my view, to getting a trade agreement. And I believe we will find common ground in the end, but it may take a few days yet. The second issue is very different in terms of its politics, and that's fishing. Highly emotive, very much linked to some of the big messaging around Brexit that the British government has delivered around taking back control, insisting on being a third country in every sense. And the promises that have been made to the British fishing industry of regaining a significant increased fishing opportunity as a result of Brexit. So where the British are at on fishing and where the EU mandate is in terms of negotiation, mandate for Michel Barnier and his task force, which is the exact opposite. It's to maintain the status quo as much as possible in terms of both access and fishing opportunities in British waters. They are very, very far apart. And I think that is going to be a very difficult political and emotive issue, even though if you look at the numbers from a financial point of view, they are much, much smaller than in many of the other areas. But that's not the way politics works, as people will know. This is about winners and losers. And so we have to find a way of resolving not only the level playing field issue and the governance model around it, but also fishing and the politics of that to ensure that both sides can live with the outcome. And if we can get over those two issues, there will be a trade deal. I'd be very confident of that. But I think it's going to take a little longer and I know business people will be rolling their eyes when I say that, because there's less than 50 days left now to the end of the year, and businesses are trying to get ready. And it's hugely frustrating when you're watching from the outside trying to run a business with this political uncertainty still hanging over us.
There are, Minister, there are lots of factors. I think
is absolutely crucial in terms of timelines to hopefully find a breakthrough in these two areas that both sides can agree to.
There are, Minister, lots of factors that will influence the shape and outcome of all of this in a somewhat indirect way when it comes to politics and internal British politics. Do you think the departure of Dominic Cummings from Downing Street might actually have a bit of an influence in things?
Well, I mean, there are factors that people are reading all sorts of things into. I mean, obviously, the Biden victory in the presidential election in the US certainly has been played up as a really big factor now in Brexit in the context of British ambition to get a UK-US trade deal in the future, and obviously the concern that President-elect Biden has expressed in the context of supporting an Irish peace process and being very firm in saying that if Brexit disrupts that in a way that is irresponsible or unfair, that would impact on the ability to get a trade deal between the US and the UK. I think that is a factor, but not the central factor in these negotiations. And also, I think we've essentially seen two very key individuals in terms of Boris Johnson's team, two very prominent leaders of the Leave campaign leaving. So that is an indication, certainly, of unrest in Number 10, to be as diplomatic as I can be about it. But look, that really is a matter for the British government and for the Prime Minister and his team. For us, we're focused on trying to find a way of getting an agreement that the UK and the British Prime Minister can sign off on, that can allow us to provide the certainty for all of the people on this call and others, so that they can plan their businesses and plan their lives accordingly. Because at the moment, in the absence of a future relationship, the levels of disruption from the 1st of January are very, very significant, not just for businesses, but for consumers as well. And my job and the job of Michel Barnier and David Frost and others is to try and find a way of getting a deal done here. And there's a lot of politics going on here as well, and a lot of distractions happening. But ultimately, I think we need to focus less on reading into these events and more on focusing on the outstanding issues and getting compromises that can move this process forward, because quite frankly, we're running out of time.
If you look at where the landing zone is for an EU-UK trade agreement and what are the outstanding issues, it has been described that if it happens, it will be a relatively thin agreement. What does that deal look like for Irish businesses? We are very worried about particular sectors. We have good grounds to be worried. Just let's focus on a trade deal roughly landing the way that it may do if those outstanding issues are ironed out.
Yeah, it might be as thin as you think, by the way. I think the actual core FTA will be quite thin because it'll be focusing on avoiding tariffs and quotas on certain products. In other words, avoiding having to switch to a default trading position determined by WTO. But if we manage to get an FTA agreed that avoids tariffs and quotas, I think that also opens the door for agreement in many other areas around aviation, around road haulage, security issues, judicial cooperation, data security, services and financial services, recognition of qualifications. There's a long list of other issues that are related to trade but are not necessarily part of a core FTA, but are certainly part of a future relationship agreement, that are really, really important for Irish businesses and for British businesses, particularly data and data security, but also many of the other areas that I've referred to around aviation and road haulage and so on. So when we talk about a thin deal, if we get this relatively thin trade deal that avoids tariffs and quotas, which would be a good outcome, that opens the door then, I think, to land agreements in many of these other areas as well, which I think would make the overall agreement far from thin. But I think the corollary is also true, because if we don't manage to get an FTA in place, and if the focus, particularly in London, turns to the blame game and the communications of that in terms of politics, then I think there will be a lot of acrimony. I think the internal market bill will become an even bigger issue if the British government decide to move ahead with that. And then we're into legal actions taking place in the new year between the EU and the UK, and the space for agreement on many of these other really important areas becomes much, much more difficult. So, I think that a thin trade deal, if you want to call it that, is a catalyst to get agreement in many other very important areas from an Irish perspective and a British perspective. And likewise, if we don't get that trade deal, then while there will be agreements needed in terms of contingency planning in many of these essential areas that facilitate basic access between the UK and the EU, I think the mood music around those negotiations will be far more divisive and therefore far less generous from an EU perspective. And of course, from an Irish perspective, that has all sorts of consequences as well in terms of disruption.
Okay,
thank
you.
There's a lot riding on a trade deal, and it's about a lot more than simply tariffs and quotas, which in themselves are really important.
Okay, Minister, I want to bring in Catherine Moroney here, AIB Head of Business Banking. We talked a little bit there about the challenges that are there for businesses. From AIB's point of view, what have you been doing to help businesses? What's available to help businesses? And how prepared are they?
Thanks, Richard. Yes, we have been preparing to support our customers for 4 years now, since the UK first said that they wished to leave the European Union. And the first thing we did was talk extensively to our business customers. So we formulated a structured way of talking to them about what they saw as the risks, and also sharing with them what we saw as the risks. And that formed the basis of the supports we provided to them. Interestingly, as we spoke to them, they asked us because they have a copy of the questions we were asking them. And it was an internal document. But what we decided to do was automate that. And so a customer can go onto their mobile phone now and look at that in the AIB Brexit Ready check. It's not a substitute for the detailed planning that they have to do, but it's like a dashboard that will tell them very quickly what it is that they need to focus on, depending on what sector they're in. And then we've supported that with specifically designed products and services that they're going to need, everything from the customs support right through to cash flow supports. And then our people, obviously, we've 32 specialist Brexit advisors all around the country and accessible to our customers. But I think the other thing in terms of your second part of that question around how prepared are our customers, I think the Minister put it well there when he said that they are looking for certainty. And indeed, it will be a huge relief if there are no tariffs, because that's a huge cash flow impact for our customers that they do not need on top of COVID. But equally, there are things that they need to be doing now, and they need to be doing them quickly. And that's realising that even in the best form of Brexit, we are going to have customs. They are going to have documentation. There may be time delays. And
what kinds of things could they do now that they might not have done, Catherine?
Okay. Very practically, the first thing I would say is to look at their supply chain and their sub-supply chain and their buyer chain, their customer chain, and check where their goods originate from. It's not just where they think they're coming from, but actually, even if they're using a distributor, what impact does that have on them? And then preparing themselves with trained staff, and there are very good government supports for that training out there. They're all available on the websites to see what is available. But to say to themselves, am I going to continue importing and exporting as I am now? Do I need to change that? You can go directly to Europe rather than going through the UK. And preparing now, because that documentation is inevitable. They are going to need that. Just the less disruption to their business in those initial phases, the better. And they can also plan around their their working capital needs in case there are any delays for them. And then there are also very specific longer term supports.
What about their relationship with the bank, with AIB? What kinds of things can you do for them? What kinds of things can they talk to you about?
Okay, that's the most important thing, to talk to us. So in addition to all the digital assets, if they do want to quickly go online and see what's available there, they can talk to any of our branches or any of our relationship managers, and indeed the specialist Brexit advisors as well. And if you follow through what they need, if you start from a business perspective, I think that's the best way to look at it. The first thing I would say, in addition to talking to us about if they do have customs needs, they may also need bank guarantees. Not in every case, but there are certain circumstances where they have to have a bank guarantee. And in addition to assessing what they need, they have to put those in place. So talking to us early about that would be really important. The other area that is quite surprising in terms of how many customers run this risk is the foreign exchange risk. So if you're dealing in sterling, rather than running that risk, to be aware, what is my break-even point? What is the price point in sterling that causes me a difficulty? Because the volatility in sterling at the moment can wipe out the profit, the margin on a particular trade, or indeed quite a substantial piece of your business. So there is a perception that managing that risk is expensive. But in fact, if a customer has inflows and outflows in sterling, they can match those in an account. And that's where they should start. How do I avoid the costs? And then they move into fixing, having a set price point, if you like, for sterling in their head, where they say to themselves, I can't afford for my business to go beyond that point. And that depends on whether you're buying or selling. And to know that they have that available from their bank, they can speak to us and fix that. And then the final thing I would say to you is it is wise. It's understandable at the moment after COVID and everything we've been through that customers don't want to borrow. You know, they're being sensible about managing and being careful of their business. But if they do find they may have a hiccup in their cash flow, they can smooth that through with working capital facilities. And there are terrific supports around that, including government-backed supports, short-term facilities. And one that I find there's a huge demand for, because it really meets their needs, is a product called the Future Growth Loan Scheme, which a customer can borrow for up to 10 years. So it gives them like that foundational support that they can pay back over a longer period of time if their cash flows and the risk profile in their business, they're comfortable doing that. And also a key part of that is they can borrow up to $500,000 unsecured. And I think that's really helpful for businesses at the moment. They are stretched. They're stretched asset-wise, they're stretched cash flow-wise, and they're concerned for the business. So that just gives that comfort level for them in their structure.
And also in that context, as the Minister flagged as well, that the deadline is approaching. We may see a situation, you know, if it was no deal or if it's an incomplete free trade deal and there are other aspects of it around logistics that have yet to be sorted out, things could get a bit chaotic on the land bridge, at British ports, that sort of thing, which can have short-term financial consequences for Irish businesses.
There is one critical point you've raised there, which is probably worth noting, Richard, and that is if you're going into the UK to trade in the UK, you can do a number of things there. You can defer duties, you can pay upfront, but if you're going to use the land bridge to cross into Europe through the UK, there is a very specific need that is mandatory. It's called a comprehensive guarantee. Some people call it a comprehensive transit guarantee or transit guarantee. It's called different things. But if you're going to use that land bridge, and if you don't want to have to pay duties on your way into the UK and out of the UK just to travel across that land bridge, leaving aside the delays that might incur in queuing, there's an absolute mandatory need for customers, if they're going to use that land bridge, to have that in place. And that takes time to put in place.
Yeah, how can businesses avail of that through AIB? Okay,
that's a very good question, because they have to start with revenue, because the revenue have to assess them for how much of a guarantee they need. So their first port of call is to go to Revenue Online. Is really the ROS system is probably the best place to have their EORI number, which many of them may have already, and then to be specific about the fact that they're going to use the land bridge. There is a system called the CDS, so they don't have to go in, they can do it, some of it online, but the revenue do have to assess them, and then they can come to us with that form. So their first port of call to the bank is to come into us with that form they get from revenue. We'll be able to see how much they need, and the bank guarantee that supports that is also mandatory. It can't be cash backed or deal with it as you go. It has to be a bank guarantee.
Okay. I'd like to bring in Danny McCoy, CEO of IBEC at this point. Danny, in a general sense, we're getting very close to the deadline. Businesses are worried. What do you see as the primary risks at this stage? The risks to whom, and what kinds of things should businesses be thinking about to be better prepared if they aren't fully prepared yet?
Well, Richard, look, there's all kinds of businesses in different sectors, different scenarios. But for me, I think it's about the volume. Can you actually get the thing that you require? The price of it is a second order issue. I'm not dismissing this as significant. So the price is going to be caught up on whether it's tariffs or whether it's scarcity, on the distribution, be that in the shipping or whatever. But actually the primary, all of that is for note if you can't actually get the product. So it's the volume delivery of the goods, I think, is probably the most critical. But I agree with the minister is that this is just about goods. And the vast majority of our businesses are actually driven, their value is driven from services, people, and capital. And there just isn't a sufficient amount of conversation about that. COVID is distracting people. Brexit has been going on, as you said, at the start for so long, people glaze over now. I think the reality will be disruption. The nature of the disruption that will occur in January will probably be the most significant consequence. I think that's what people are fearing most.
In relation to the state of preparedness, one imagines that the bigger businesses have been on the case here quite early on, even though they didn't have any certainty about what way it was going to land. Perhaps it's not totally clear. But smaller businesses then on the other side, there's certainly a sense that they may not be as well prepared.
Well, I'd cite Mike Tyson here. Everybody's got a game plan until you get the first punch in the face. And then you see you have to adapt. And so given the level of uncertainty, go back to my first point, all depends what actually happens in the first couple of days, first couple of weeks of January. So neither big, small, nor medium can actually be certain that their plan is in place. They can do, as Catherine was saying, the minister, to get the administration pieces right. There are knowables here that you must, for necessity, have, but nobody knows what will be sufficient. And therefore, despite the negotiators saying, this is going to be 1st of January and pure, everybody knows there's going to have to be grace periods here. There's going to have to be transition because business was offered a transition period. But in order to know what a transition period is, you've got to know where you're going to. You know the full details and then prepare for it. So this has been removed by the actions of Britain, it must be said, has been removed from all of us in the business community. If we expect the 1st of January is a go live date, then that's tantamount to having no transition period. There are elements of transition that people will know, but fundamentally, it's not the transition period that the business communities of Europe nor Britain were promised.
So are you saying, Danny, that if there's chaos at the ports, I'm thinking particularly, let's say, at places like Dover between Britain and France and the continent, that ultimately there are a set of rules that will have to apply and various checks and various paperwork, but if there's chaos, they may just have to say, we are going to apply them, but we've got to get this moving, we've got to get you through today, that there might be a period of a few weeks to try and work through that?
Right throughout to Brexit, there's always been the truth and what's believed. And there may well be an absolute truth, and it may well be that it's absolutely enforced on day one, but is that credible? Do people believe that? And businesses act on their beliefs. And so you might try and change that beliefs, but the whole process of Brexit up to this point is that dates come and go, and they've been non-credible in the past. Brexit is happening now. We understand that this is a firm date, but the question is about the application once you go through that. We get the theory of it, but there's a fundamental uncertainty about the application.
Minister, just on that point, from discussions that you've been involved in relation to all of this, have you had any indication, whether it be from the British side, from the European, the Brussels side, or individual governments, that if things are very chaotic, there may have to be, on a pragmatic basis, an interim way of dealing with things for a few weeks or months?
To be honest, I think that's very dangerous messaging. I know that certainly from an EU perspective, once the end of the transition formally comes about, then we are effectively trading, and if there's no deal, then we're effectively trading on WTO terms. And from an EU perspective, what that means is full application of the new realities, unless there's an agreement, of course, to give certain flexibilities around timelines and application of new standards and new approaches and so on. And so, for example, if you look at the protocol on Ireland and Northern Ireland, which in itself is a very complex discussion, believe me, and some of the people on this call will understand that only too well. And part of that discussion around the implementation of the protocol may well involve some flexibilities in certain areas, but in the absence of an agreement in advance of the end of the year, the idea that if there is disruption and chaos because the UK, for example, isn't ready for the end of transition, and I think there's good reason to believe that in some areas they're not, the language from the UK side has been that they will essentially give a 6-month period on goods coming into the UK to give time and space for their systems to be up and running fully and their ports to operate as they should in terms of goods coming into the UK. But there's no such reassurance coming from the EU side. In fact, and I think the EU have been very consistent on this, to be fair to them. The idea that the response to significant disruption at the end of Brexit transition is that they will show a lot of flexibility and pragmatism in terms of facilitating trade. I think that is misplaced. So we've been warning about the disruption of Brexit for 4.5 years. We've been warning about the transition period of 12 months being too short for the last year. The UK have made the political decision not to seek any more time. In fact, they've been extremely firm on that in an effort to try to put pressure on the negotiating teams to get an agreement in place quicker. So I don't think there'll be much appetite politically across the European Union in terms of political leadership in the Commission and in the Council to offer very much facilitation or flexibility around the implementation of the trading standards that are required from a third country.
Okay.
Unless, of course, that's baked into an agreement between now and the end of next week, if and when we get an agreement on that time frame.
Thank you.
So my message to businesses would be very clear. Plan for a fundamental change at the end of this year. Hopefully, the disruption can be limited somewhat by a future relationship agreement in many of the areas that I referred to earlier. But don't be planning on the basis of, if there's chaos, well, both sides will essentially be reasonable and show flexibility for a period of 3 months or 6 months to allow things to be sorted out. That's not the message I'm getting politically, and I think it's important to say that.
Okay. I'd like to bring in Ian Talbot, Chambers Ireland CEO here. Ian, from a Chambers Ireland point of view, looking at your role, Chambers up and down the country, different size businesses, what's your role in supporting businesses through Brexit? How are you helping them?
Well, I suppose we're all in a unique situation here. We're all trying to develop our roles still as this thing crashes towards us at great speed. And if we are talking about a 1st of January hard deadline, that realistically is probably around the 20th of December, because we all know how hard it'll be, particularly this year with COVID around, to get anything done in those last 10 days. So a big thing for us is getting the message out there. We've 40 affiliated chambers around the country, and they're all trying to reach out in their local communities to businesses to make so many of those points that Catherine actually made earlier. Do you realise what you need to do? Do you have the right guarantees in place? Are you still going to use the land bridge? Are you going to look, for example, to use some of the direct routes into the continent that have been announced recently, such as Stena and Irish Ferries, for example, to avoid the land bridge altogether. And I'd like to also say as well that I've always a worry that we're speaking to converted already on webinars like this. People tuning in here already realize they have some sort of issue they need to address. And there's still a big cohort out there that don't have that realization yet. So I think another point Catherine made is really important. You've got to look through your whole supply chain and make sure everyone in your supply chain is responding as well. So I think we've all got a responsibility here about the communication of information. But the kind of things chambers are doing locally, we've a significant number of chamber staff, for example, around the country, doing the SkillNet Clear Customs course. So they'll be able to provide better, more targeted advice on the customs requirements. We're running a lot of webinars. You'll find we're much more area specific. So for example, if you go to our chambers around the border in Letterkenny, Dundalk and places, they'll be able to give you a lot more comprehensive information about the realities of the border crossing. And other chambers will be more focused on, for example, port infrastructure and what companies need to do about their shipping and so on. There are things out there that we need companies to focus on as well, particularly those continuing to trade with the UK, about, for example, contractual terms. Particularly if we have a no-deal Brexit and the possibility of tariffs, contracts will have to go into place that probably haven't been required before to make sure there's great clarity between buyer and seller about who's responsible for what charges, in particular those tariffs. So there are things called Incoterms, for example, that we have a global mandate in to provide that certainty. Terms we've probably heard not understood as Incoterms, free on board, cost insurance and freight, CIF, those sort of terms. So really important that companies are looking at all these things, understanding their supply chain, understanding how to get stuff. And we also probably have had a focus on exporters more than importers, vitally important for importers as well, to be listening and engaging on this stuff. But there's also great opportunities here. So for example, for companies that have always struggled to compete, for example, with UK companies into the EU single market, we should now be significantly more competitive than UK companies dealing into that EU single market. We also have a range of free trade agreements that a lot of SMEs haven't really explored. So there are great opportunities here, and we're also great opportunity for Ireland to be a hub for all manner of businesses, including UK businesses, Commonwealth businesses, as well as the traditional US market, for Ireland to be that English-speaking hub into the European Union. And think through all the trickle-down business then for the rest of the economy that comes from those sort of jobs. So there are some positive things that we can look towards here. But I think as everyone's recognising, January, February are going to be very, very scary.
Ian, you mentioned there about some companies being very sharp, very focused on the potential risks early on to their business from Brexit for some time. Have you seen from around the country a greater level of activation or interest from those other companies? In other words, are they coming to this quite late? In the last few months, though, has that increased?
We're concerned that the trend isn't increasing quickly enough. The core answer is yes, it has increased, but we still think there's a lot of companies that just haven't responded yet. And it's very difficult. So we had this conversation within our network earlier this week. Just so many companies are just swamped by the issues around COVID. They just can't get to Brexit yet. And the point I think that Danny made earlier as well, I think people have an expectation that something will be sorted out. In particular, we're concerned that the messaging around deal versus no deal is that a lot of businesses will just conclude, well, if a deal is done, and I'm sure they'll do a deal, then most of this stuff goes away. Whereas the reality, things like the customs declarations, for example, aren't going away. They're going to exist in either circumstance. Even things like if you're bringing samples into the UK, for example, expensive bits of computer equipment or TV cameras or something, you'll probably need to bring with it a thing called an 88 carnet, which is a kind of a certificate to transfer goods that you're going to bring back without having to pay the duty on them. There's so many things to trip us up here that we just haven't had to deal with in the past. We're just worried that not enough companies are focused enough on it.
Okay. Well, we sort of took the temperature from AIB business customers earlier on by getting them to submit some questions on some of these issues. And I might just put a couple of them to you there, Catherine. Does AIB offer cash flow support? should I need it to help me through Brexit? You mentioned about some of the supports you have. Just tell us a bit about that cash flow.
Sure. I mean, that's a whole range, all the way from short-term working capital and all the way through to long-term, the 10-year funding that I described to you. And depending on what they need, the point made by Ian about COVID having kind of stressed their cash flows to some degree already, particularly ones that have been closed down. And in some cases, you have to look at that by sector, Richard, because some sectors that are going to be affected in terms of their trade with the UK aren't necessarily those who are relying on the home market, like hospitality. But no matter what sector you're in, if you're going to need supports, they range from the short term to the very long term. And then if there are concerns, I have mentioned that some of those are unsecured. So it is possible to do that. I think the key thing I would say to customers is to come in and talk to us or any of their banks. It's not just us, to make sure they come in and have that conversation. That's really important, because there's a whole suite of supports. They're not all secure. They don't have to worry about, I wonder, will I get it or not? The first thing is to have the conversation. There is most likely some way that we can support them. And even in some cases, for example, if they have good quality invoices, they can be discounted for them. There's an awful lot of customers at the moment. There's a big uptick in releasing cash flow from the assets they already have in their business. And then finally, there are specific government supports, including the COVID supports that they have been availing of, which I know they're not directly for Brexit, but if they're going to support our customers through those difficult times and give them that base that they can trade from, they're all available. I could go through specifics with you of different ones. There's different terms. There are some very competitive rates. I know that's not the key thing. The key thing is access to the funding, but it does make a difference to their bottom line. So they've all been structured very carefully and thoughtfully to make sure no matter what it is they're looking for, that they can have that support.
Just another question there. It depends really on the volume of business and the sector and so forth, but how much are customs costs going to increase by? What cost will they have to my business?
That's a really difficult one to answer, because if we have tariffs, tariffs are complex and you have to look at them. You need expert advice, or you at least need to have somebody competent in your business to look at them. Tariffs can range, for example, in specific areas of healthcare, from no tariff, even under WTO trade agreements, to up to 40% and sometimes higher than 40%. And there are some products where you have multiple tariffs depending on the content of that product. Biscuits are a very good example, believe it or not. They can be very complex. You only have to do
the ingredients to some extent,
yes,
and the tariff.
But the other point that I'd make to you, and Ian made it there, even if we don't have tariffs, we definitely have costs to business. Aside from the delays and the time factor, there are also the cost of customs and putting that document. And that at least is either a member of your own team, or you're using a freight forwarder who you're going to have to pay an agency fee to, or a shipping agent. And they're getting full. So they are also, they themselves have capacity issues. So the cost depends on how much, the volume, where you're going, whether there are tariffs or not. And if you imagine in your business the cost of even one FTE, one person, to do all of that customs work for you, if you're not going to outsource it, there's at a minimum the cost of a person to do that for you.
Sure. Danny, a question here. It's not really a banking question, it's a business question, but it's very broad. I presume it depends on the circumstances, but we have a question in where somebody says, should I set up a company in the UK or in Northern Ireland? And this is something that some businesses have debated, whether it should form part of their business structure, all of their business structure, or what they should do.
Well, look, again, as you said, the specifics to individuals, but at a push, we're going to see this effect that people are going to spread their bets. Like the act of actually being in Northern Ireland gives a hinge point to companies to try to extract the benefits of being in the EU single market, as well as retaining in the UK. All splits of unions, be they customs or political, give rise to this kind of spreading of corporate risks and opportunities. So it won't be for everybody, but companies have already done this. We've seen this with the financial institutions are getting themselves ready in terms of into different regulatory zones. So we can anticipate that there will be this type of duality of setting up companies. We saw in the early stages quite a lot of acquisitions by Irish companies, Irish meat companies, to ensure that they're in the right domestic market for their products so they're not exporting. So yes, will be the answer to that. We'll see quite a significant amount of that spreading of the risk between the different jurisdictions.
Minister, a final question to you. We have talked about what might happen after the 1st of January, what might happen short term, but longer term, this is a real change, isn't it, in the ultimate economic relationship between Ireland and the UK. And for many businesses, it's something we've talked about in Ireland before. We need to look beyond the UK, particularly in certain sectors as well. Do you think that this is the beginning of a road there that will be very significant in the future? Would you encourage businesses to look at the continental European market and others?
Well, I mean, undoubtedly, we've seen over the last 4 years, since Brexit became a real topic of discussion, we've seen diversification in certain markets already. So, you know, we've seen an increase in the percentage of our overall export market coming from the rest of the EU and from other parts of the world, and a slight reduction in terms of reliance on the UK. But, you know, I think we'd be very foolish to write off the UK as a really, really important market for us, even with the disruption that's going to come with them becoming a third country, and hopefully with a future relationship agreement in place that makes that a little bit more manageable. But you know, they are, as people will know, the UK and Ireland are effectively integrated as the same market for so many products. I mean, I know the food sector very well, having been a minister in that space, and certainly the British and Irish food industries are so interwoven and interlinked. You know, we have 10 billion euros worth of trade each year. We export 5.5 billion euros worth of food and drink to them, and we import 4.5 billion euros worth from the UK. So these are sectors that I don't believe should be focusing solely on moving away from a British market and looking elsewhere. But certainly they do need to hedge their bets. And there are some sectors that are overly reliant on Britain as a marketplace. And I think that is something that needs to be balanced now with market diversification, looking elsewhere. But look, could I say to people, because I might get much more time after answering this question, there are a number of very practical things that businesses need to think about now. First of all, they need to ensure that there is someone in their business that genuinely understands this stuff in terms of the detail of what we're facing here and the supports that are available to respond to that, because there's a lot to look at. And there's a huge amount of supports. I mean, we have put hundreds of millions of euros of supports there through the banking system, but also through direct grant aid as well, through various different state bodies and organizations, whether it's local enterprise boards, whether it's Enterprise Ireland, whether it's Intertrade Ireland, and many other bodies as well. So businesses need to make sure that they're not missing out on something here in terms of this transition that is coming. But also, and I think was said earlier by a number of the speakers, people do need to look at their supply chains. I mean, if you trade to, through, or from the UK, well, then it is likely that from the 1st of January, even if there is a deal, your business model may have to adapt and change to the new realities. And that may be expensive. For some people, it may be very difficult to look for alternative supply sources and so on. For some, I think they need to be looking in a very pragmatic way at direct shipping routes from the 1st of January on to the rest of the single market, to avoid all of this hassle and paperwork and transit guarantees and all the other things that are going to now be part of using the GB land bridge, which we have, for all sorts of reasons, taken for granted for many, many years. So a lot of this practical stuff we can plan for now. And a lot of big businesses have already done it. I think we've seen that in terms of the number of businesses that we know have customs numbers now. We know that almost 97% of exports to the UK in value terms is covered by companies that have registered with revenue for an EORI number and have interacted with revenue in terms of the preparations that are needed. And I think about 96% of imports are covered as well. So we know the bulk of big business that are trading regularly with the UK are getting into shape. And from a state perspective, you know, Dublin Port, Rosslare Port, Dublin Airport, they're going to be ready on the 1st of January for the new realities. We're doing a lot of work on that to make sure that they are. From a legislative point of view, I introduced a new Brexit omnibus bill, which effectively is, from a legal perspective, doing everything we can to protect businesses, protect consumers, protect Irish people in the context of the disruption of Brexit across multiple different areas. So, you know, there is an enormous amount of preparation work happening. But if businesses don't help themselves, then they are going to find that they're very exposed from the start of next year, and hoping that somehow the politicians will just resolve this and everything will just stay as it is or close to as it is a big, big mistake. I can't emphasize that enough.
Thank you for that.
As I said, I believe we can get a deal on a future relationship, but that doesn't mean that the disruption that people have referred to earlier doesn't need significant planning. And if that planning isn't underway by now, and it should be, then you really need to get moving on it very, very quickly.
Well, thank you very much. We'll have to wrap up this panel session at the moment. Thank you to Simon Coveney, Minister for Foreign Affairs and Defence, to AIB Head of Business Banking, Catherine Moroney, to IBEC CEO Danny McCoy, and to Chambers Ireland CEO Ian Talbot. Thanks again for joining us. Well, you're very welcome to our second panel discussion of this Get Brexit Ready with AIB event. And I'm delighted to be joined once again by Catherine Moroney, who's Head of Business Banking Market at AIB. And we have, by live link, three representatives of three businesses. Fiona Craul, who's Director of Sweetspot Sourcing. We also have Robin Jones, who is CEO of Golden Bake, and Noelle O'Connor, founder and CEO of TanOrganic. You're all very welcome. If I could start perhaps with you, Fiona, just tell us a little bit about Sweetspot Sourcing, the business, and when you set it up and what you do.
Hi, Richard. Hi, Catherine. Thank you very much for the invitation. So Sweetspot was founded by myself and Susan Dempsey almost 9 years ago. We're a wholesale trading company. So we specialise in the design and manufacturing of bespoke products. And this can range from anywhere from promotional products, furniture, children's toys, beauty products, seasonal. There's quite a variety. And we work with factories based all over the world, but our particular expertise would be with factories in China. Our head office is here in Naas in County Kildare, but we also have an office in Belfast and in Xiamen in China. And then our clients really are a mixture. They're a mix of retailers, FMCG brands, beauty brands, SMEs, and some smaller startup companies that are developing a new product and need help to find a manufacturer or to scale up their business. And our clients then are based primarily in the UK and Ireland. So hence why our interest in all things Brexit related.
Great. And where did you get the idea for the business originally, Fiona?
The business of sourcing?
Yes, yeah.
It's something I've been doing for a number of years. And Sue and I came together and we felt that there weren't that many companies specialising in bespoke products. So for companies that don't want something that's completely off the shelf, they want to adapt and to change that product and to work directly with factories in doing that. And that's where really it came from. It was basically bringing together our knowledge and working with brands. And there was really a real appetite for it. We started in 2012, so a hard time to start business, but it worked out well, thank God.
So I presume then you spend a lot of time, or do you, travelling to source products, going to China, looking around at various events, showcase events, exhibitions, all the very kind of stuff that's not happening at the moment?
Very much so, yeah. It's a very different way. I suppose the earlier years would have been far busier in terms of the trawling the halls for new products and trade shows, but still we would still do maybe 5 or 6 of those a year, and we would travel to China maybe 2-3 times a year. I was there just before in November of last year, and I really need to go now, but I obviously can't. So it has changed how we have to operate.
And again, it's interesting you mentioned about the UK from a Brexit point of view, and we'll be coming to that a little bit later, that the UK thing for you, you have UK clients and customers, and then you also have goods travelling to Ireland from the UK, through the UK as well.
Mm-hmm.
So you have an impact there on a few different levels.
Yeah, we do. I mean, it's been very difficult for the last, I suppose, 3 years for us to trade as a supplier into the UK, particularly with bigger projects. You know, if we're shipping product from China directly into the UK or even into Ireland and then into the UK, we can't with confidence price those jobs, and we don't know if there's going to be duties and tariffs involved. So we've really had to shy away from the bigger projects within the UK.
Okay, great. And we can tease that out in some more detail as to what you've done shortly. Next up, Robin Jones, Golden Bake CEO. Tell us a bit about the business, what you do, when you started.
Yeah, we're a frozen food business based in Coolock in Dublin. The company was started in 1987, and today we employ 120 people. We're probably best known as being the home of the jambon, but we do a whole range of savoury, sweet and unfilled puff pastry. Over the past couple of years, we've seen great growth in our UK market. We've nearly doubled our sales in the UK over the past 3 years. It has been our biggest growth market. So obviously the risk of a hard Brexit is high on our agenda, but overall it does only represent about 30% of our overall turnover. So it's not critical to the business, but it may hinder the growth that we have planned for the UK in the coming years.
And when you export, Robin, to the UK, what's the supply chain like there? Who are you selling to? Are you selling to various cafes, retail multiples? What's the outlet?
Yeah, in general, we'd sell to the retail multiples. They would be the biggest part of our customer base in the UK. But we do also sell to wholesale food service distributors who would then on-sell to the cafes. So we wouldn't have a direct relationship with, say, individual cafes in the UK. So our biggest selling point really is to larger companies who have the full distribution network in the UK, and we'd send direct to their depots for onward distribution within the UK.
And then the rest of the business, aside from the UK exports, where are you typically selling to? Is it the Irish market mainly, or are there other markets?
Yeah, predominantly the majority of the rest of the business is Ireland. We do have some business in continental Europe, a little bit in America, a little bit in the Middle East, but predominantly we would be an Irish and UK focused business.
Okay, great. And Noelle O'Connor, TanOrganic. We've met before on Dragon's Den. It seems like quite a while ago now. Just remind us a little bit about your business, when you got started and what you do.
Hi, Richard. Hi, Catherine. Yeah, we did. We met 10 years ago, would you believe? We were 10 this year. So I think I was probably about 8 years before my time. So we really have had an amazing, the last 2 to 3 years. So TanOrganic is an eco-certified, vegan certified, cruelty certified, ethical score of 100, and only 7 cosmetic companies in the world have that score, self-tan brand. Our main customers and markets are in Ireland, brick and mortar, Boots and independent pharmacy groups. The UK, we have brick and mortar, Boots and third party online. We had a huge travel retail segment. We have Amazon, with export distributors, and we have shopping channel. So there would be the spread of channels that we have across TanOrganic.
So how big a chunk of the business is the UK and exports to the UK?
So just this year, we launched into Boots UK top shelf. So the strategy was always to be top in Ireland Boots, which we were, and we grew incrementally over that time. And we had very fast growth in the last 2 to 3 years because I think the sustainable eco ethos is much stronger. So we launched in 250 top shelf stores and Boots in February. Actually, the trays just went in the 3rd week of February, would you believe? And we had lockdown in March. So that was really difficult for us because we paid for all that space. But really, in March, we didn't know where we would be, and we didn't even know we would be in business in June. But what had happened is all of our customers that couldn't find us on the airlines or get us in store, came online, and our business grew massively online from 3% of our business to 30% of our business. So for us, it was great that we had a brand that was so strong that people found us.
Okay. And Fiona, let's talk a little bit about Brexit coming. What have your thoughts and actions been around preparing for Brexit?
Well, first and foremost, those couple of years ago, we got advice around it, trying to see where our exposure was. We set up a company in Belfast and opened bank accounts there, so that we had a foothold, I suppose, in the UK should we need it for customs and clearance primarily, but even if customers would like us to invoice them directly from the UK. We don't hold sterling as much as we would have done previously. We probably do forward buy a lot more of our currencies just to try and put out as many variables as possible. The other side of it then is that, and it's probably an unfortunate one, but we have started to move away from our UK suppliers for now. You know, hopefully it'll be a short-term fix, but we're just concerned about the capacity in the UK and in Ireland in dealing with, if there's a hard Brexit and there's duties involved, the documentation, will the suppliers be able to upskill quickly enough? So I think there is going to be a period of time where it's going to be a little bit messy, a lot of delays. So I think for now, yeah, we're trying to just replace those suppliers with European suppliers, Irish suppliers. But other than that, it's really just wait and see what happens and try to adapt then as quickly as we can.
And setting up the business north of the border, if there is a trade deal and there isn't a tariff problem or issue, are you still satisfied that that was worth doing? Because you did mention that just in case people wanted to get, you know, an invoice from a UK business, etc.
Mm-hmm. I think it was worth doing. I mean, it's not difficult to do. We have a lot of customers in the north anyway, and we have a lot of customers in the UK. So it was probably going to be a natural progression for us. We were working in 2017 and 18 on a big market entry strategy into the UK. We had to hold fire on that. So it was something we were going to do anyway.
Catherine, how typical from the sort of customer base and client base that you're working with and seeing through AIB, how typical are those kinds of issues and those kinds of solutions there that Fiona has looked at?
They're very typical. And I mean, there's 3 fabulous businesses who've already had to pivot in so many ways for COVID and have this Brexit wave coming at them where we're still not sure the course of action they have to take. But described very well there in terms of, I would add one other thing we've seen businesses doing. Fiona described how she's established a registered office, a business in fact, in the north to allow her have, and also she's indirectly matching her currencies there as well, which is a great thing to do. We have also seen, particularly last year, less so this year because of the COVID stop-start impact, we saw a lot of businesses start to use warehousing to store goods. So the other thing Fiona spoke about there was the idea that they may not source from the UK anymore. Quite a number of businesses have done that they're either they've split it, so they maybe do 50-50 or whatever works for them.
And isn't this an issue as well? Because at home in Ireland, we can have a lot of marketing, a lot of information campaigns to encourage businesses to be Brexit ready. If you're doing business with British companies and they're not Brexit ready, it's very hard for you to ensure that they are. So there's an uncertainty there, isn't it?
That's really important. You have to have that conversation with them. And another point that was raised there was about your contracts, and they may or may not cover tariffs. So there is a need to allow for that. And you don't want it to be a force majeure where you're having an argument with somebody about what it means. You do have to try and the other thing is, to be fair, businesses are so busy, they don't want to waste time and money on something that might not happen. What is key, and we discussed it earlier, the things they can do, like Fiona just described there, you can do those. They will serve you well. That's time well spent, that's money well spent, and human resources well spent. And then I think we're going to just have to deal with tariffs if they arise, which will be a very significant event if they do, and hopefully we won't be facing that situation.
Okay, Robin, let's talk a little bit about Brexit. What sort of approach have you taken to it? What kinds of things have you put in place, or how prepared are you for it?
Well, the point you just made there is actually something that we've been surprised about. So we feel that Brexit, or our experience with our customers, Brexit is a bigger point for our Irish customers than it necessarily is for our UK customers, surprisingly. So The reality probably is that I'm not so sure that our UK customers are as prepared perhaps as they might want to be at this stage. So we really have to take the initiative to really cover their bases for them. So ultimately, our approach that we're doing here is we want our UK customers not to realize that there's any impact on our side. So if we have to, as Fiona's saying, set up a company in the UK so that they get the same delivery terms, they don't have to pay VAT, etc., we've tried to put that structure in place because every company has competitors. We have competitors in the UK, and we certainly don't want to put ourselves at a disadvantage compared to our UK-based competitors. So we're doing everything we can that's in our control today to prepare for whatever Brexit is going to throw out, whether it be a soft or a hard Brexit. I think there are some realities that are going to happen from the 1st of January, like extra paperwork, regardless of whether there's tariffs on that, there will be paperwork. So we're preparing as best we can on what we can control. And obviously we're preparing for what we feel may be the future, whether there are tariffs, etc. But we're trying not to get too distracted by what is not within our control today.
And when you mentioned there, Robin, about paperwork and customs, one of the issues that arose was whether or not we in Ireland would have enough customs brokers or enough trained people quickly enough in time. How has all that played out for you?
Well, we've tried, we're trying to insource it within the company as best as possible. It's been a challenge. We've been disappointed to frustrated by the lack of clarity within what I might say is the professional services industry in helping us through this. I would have thought that there were sort of common ABCs on how this might happen outside of EU trading. And we found it relatively challenging to get very clear guidance on how we should do things internally. We have found a lack of resources available to outsource this, which is why we've decided to try to do it in-house. But we are getting some support, to be fair, from our logistics providers who will take on some of the burden of the paperwork from us.
What about that point, Catherine? This is a real nuts and bolts problem, isn't it, for a lot of businesses around having people with the right skills or access to the people with the right skills to do the paperwork?
Absolutely. And not only that, not only is it nuts and bolts, it has to be 100% accurate or it's wrong. So customs are very specific. You even spell the name of a company wrong and you have a challenge with that documentation. So it's exactly as described. Now, there are firms out there that specialise in helping, particularly freight forwarders, agents and some of the big accountancy firms. But it does have to be done absolutely correctly. And that's even before you apply tariffs. That's just for the customs documentation that's required without tariffs. The other thing I would say is it is worth probably going onto the DEBI, the government website, and seeing, what's available there. They are providing skills training. Enterprise Ireland are providing it for their customers too. There are others who are providing those really specific. It is sit down with a cold towel around your head and work through the accuracy of what you need, and it has to be right.
Okay. Noelle, just tell us a little bit about Brexit, what your approach to it has been, what your fears are around it, what have you done to prepare?
We've been preparing for 3 to 4 years now for the possibility of a hard Brexit. So what we've done, for example, Boots, very robust business case and contract. So we're not going to be liable for any of the tariffs that come there. So we protected ourselves there. We also looked at focusing on new brands, channels and markets outside of the UK. The UK is an important market for us and always will be, but we wanted to kind of limit the impact of a hard Brexit. And things like that, our travel retail, for example, we supplied every airline in the UK. So we worked about 2 years ago to find an international airline distributor in Germany. So we ship all of our product to them now, albeit that business is zero. But when it comes back, they will ship to all of our UK, and we're contracting in euros. So we tried to cut out as much impact as we could early on. Really, the currency thing would have been the biggest impact for us, and really. With that, we've had robust contracts protecting us, contracting in euro where we can, and building a natural hedge where we use our income and expenditure in sterling and use that natural hedge. So we have protected ourselves as much as we can. And as for the tariffs are all in our contracts, so we're not going to be affected there. So regarding the shipping and customs, we deal with big shippers because we deal internationally with many other countries. So we're talking with them for those guys to look after all of the paperwork and outsource that. That's going to cost us a little extra, but it's going to distract us internally from growing the company and growing the channels. So we feel that it's worth pay that extra money and have someone look after all of that paperwork, and someone that's knowledgeable and knows how to do it.
And it's interesting because you talked earlier on about the potential value of the UK market. Brexit has been hanging around for 4.5 years, but it didn't deter you. And I'm thinking about what Minister Simon Coveney said earlier as well, about this isn't about turning our backs on the UK market, but it's having to prepare for and face up to whatever the new realities of it might be. You weren't deterred at all.
We can't be deterred. It's just it's too important of a market for us, you know. And so we just did as much as we could to limit the effect. And like that, you know, for example, take Boots as a case, you know, all of those contracts were signed and we knew that if a hard Brexit come, we weren't going to be affected by tariffs or anything like that. Yeah, so no, we can't ignore it. And the other thing we've done is we have a third-party logistics, and we've been working with them for about two years. So all of our UK customers are serviced by that warehouse, not our Irish warehouse.
Okay. And I want to just talk to you, the three of you, a little bit about banking and your relationship with the bank and how you have approached that, because you bank with AIB. Fiona, what for you have you done, or what conversations have you had with the bank that they were able to do something for you?
Well, I think first, something that we've always done anyway, because we've been dealing with China, we use the Treasury Department in AIB for our forward buying, and that it's easy, it works, and that's something we'll continue to do. But for in terms of support, especially this year with COVID, we did have to change our business model a little bit, and earlier on in the year we needed funding pretty urgently. And we rang our relationship manager, and she had the funding approved within 24 hours, which was pretty amazing and just allowed us to get on with what we do. So they've been great, and just checking in with us, making sure how are we getting on, you know, is there anything else that we need? Do we need support? It's really been very, very good, especially this year.
Okay, and Robin, what about you?
Well, our biggest focus leading up to Brexit now would be working capital. So we're likely going to have to buy in more raw ingredients and packaging, as well as holding finished stock. So our big focus working with the bank is preparing for the cash spike that's going to involve. And the bank have been very supportive of us with that. So I would say we're relatively well prepared for that. But it's really been about working capital. The foreign exchange point on our side is relevant, but less so. We would, and started, we've bought ingredients in from the UK. So similar to Fiona, we have had to consider whether we continue that into the future, but we've had a relatively good natural hedge internally from our raw ingredients purchased into our sales into the UK. So our main focus would really be on working capital.
And just as a matter of interest there, Robin, you said you've looked at maybe sourcing more ingredients from somewhere other than the UK. What are your options there? Is it Ireland or is it further afield?
Historically, if we had an option to source in Ireland, we generally have been sourcing in Ireland. So in general, where we're looking to potentially replace a UK supplier on the back of Brexit, it's generally not within Ireland. We do have to look further afield. It's generally continental Europe. It has been complicated. You're obviously dealing with potential language barriers. You're dealing with longer transport lead times, and you're dealing with a higher transport cost as well. So often the simple switch from a UK supplier to, let's say, a French supplier isn't really saving us a huge amount, even on the post-tariff price from the UK. So we feel that regardless of whether we can change our supplier in the event of a hard Brexit, our cost base is going to go up as a result regardless. So we're obviously, like everybody is, hoping for for a soft Brexit. So while there may be more paperwork, at least the tariff point will be taken off the table.
Okay. And Noelle, for you, what kind of things have you had to contact AIB about, and what way have they been able to support you?
So the nature of our business and the organic ingredients that we use and the formulas that we have means that our supply chain is considerably longer than normal supply chains because of the ingredients and certifications. And AIB have really been instrumental in funding stocking loans for that lengthier supply chain. And that has even got longer now, because we may have had a lead time of 12 weeks, has turned into 22 weeks with COVID. But they've been great, yeah, on the stocking loans. And a lot of our new business, you know, we don't have a shortage of the opportunities, especially with this new brand. So for us, it's really being able to fund the growth of the business.
So Catherine, how typical are those? It's interesting, it's short-term, working capital, those kinds of things. Is that the pattern you're seeing?
It's a really good example of different aspects serving their needs. It's about what they need. I mean, it was an interesting point there. Funding growth is a really critical one, because really good businesses with good ideas and good products, very often it's not that they run out of customers willing to engage with them. They run out of cash flow. It's like over trading, but they're trying to build a business. So having the funding following the growth of your business in a way that makes sure that doesn't happen to you is really, really critical. And I think we've seen some really good examples. It's very interesting as well. Two subtle points made there. One was that philosophy of, it's not that they want to shrink their UK business, it's that they want to grow the other businesses internationally. And we're seeing a lot of that. And we're even seeing, in addition to having companies abroad, we're seeing businesses use warehouses, so that concern about the longer chain that may, especially over the transition period, they're putting product into warehouses. A lot of people are using Poland. That seems to be very competitive for some reason. So that's another dynamic that is happening, as well as looking for other markets.
So another chain in the another change in the supply chain that's probably coming. Now I want to ask the three of you. I'll start with you, Fiona. What is your outlook for the next 6 to 12 months? And I know COVID is a major factor in all of that, and we are talking about Brexit, but particularly with Brexit in mind, what are you expecting and what are you prepared for?
Do you know what? I think it's interesting because, and it's impossible not to talk about COVID, but I think there's been a bit of a Brexit COVID collision here, because in some ways we've seen something positive, and it's kind of placed us a little bit better for Brexit, because I think over the last 8 to 9 months we've realised how difficult it has been to get stock to Ireland. You know, we are an island. And anything coming out from abroad needs to come here. And we're really reliant on products from abroad and packaging. And what we've really seen at the moment is, especially from COVID, but additionally from Brexit now, is this real pressure on the supply chain. So, for example, at the moment, airlines aren't flying into the major cities that they normally would, into Dubai, into Amsterdam, into Germany. And that's putting a huge capacity issue for cargo, trying to move it around the world, and that means that there's a lot of delay and there's a lot of cost involved. Like at the moment, we're seeing in China, UK companies are stockpiling out of China, and so while we have the COVID capacity issue, we now have a Brexit capacity issue, and again, that's cost. So the positive I kind of think I see out of it is Irish companies, and the necessity that we have to do now to support Irish companies, particularly Irish manufacturing, try to reduce our reliance on importing. And I really think that's something that's going to really come to the fore in the next 6 to 12 months, and especially for ourselves, we're going to start to use far more Irish companies in our sourcing than we have done.
Okay. Robin, what about you? The next 6 months, you look ahead, what's keeping you awake at night? Is it Brexit?
Well, we'd be cautiously optimistic about the next 6 to 12 months. We have a strong pipeline of new products coming online, innovative new products. So we feel that even if there was a tariff in the UK, that because they're new and innovative products, that we feel that the price point will be able to absorb that. But also we've taken a lot of positive from the past 6 to 9 months with COVID. And we have taken a lot of stock from our ability internally to pivot to the challenges that we face. And I think we should all take a bit of optimism from the resilience shown by the economy on how companies have been quite innovative in face of turmoil, ultimately, for many companies. Now, Brexit it's easier maybe to pivot on your own internal procedures within your own market. That is easier, to be fair, than replacing 30% of your business in a country. There's a reality about that. But I think we've taken a lot of positivity around how we've reacted both internally and I would say as an economy here in Ireland from COVID. So would be cautiously optimistic about the future.
And Noelle, what about you when you look at the next 6 to 12 months? Are you fearful? Are you positive? You're shaking your head there.
I'm not fearful and I am positive. Maybe I'm over optimistic, but I can't tell you how grateful I am to be in the position I am. And COVID has put Brexit in perspective for me. In March, I came down with COVID and so did my business partner, myself, very early on. But I had structures put in place that were put in plan last year and I had a great support team. So we were able to pivot quickly. Pre-COVID, 3% of our business was online. Post-COVID, 30% of our business online. So those margins are much higher and that wasn't difficult. That was just people finding us when they couldn't get us anywhere else. 2021, 52% of our business globally online is what we're going to focus on. We also have a new brand that we've been working on since 2018. And I suppose what COVID did was let us work on the business instead of in the business. And we were able to fast track some amazing things that we were working on. And we've a massive deal for 2021 that I'm really excited about. So I don't know, Richard, whether it is, I like it just a good recession. Last time it was Dragon's Den and this time it's COVID. But honestly, the outlook's looking quite positive for us. And, you know, we're taking on new people, 3 new key hires. And so, yeah, I think we've been able to make things that we had in place work for us. Maybe it was a little bit of luck, timing, but we've got a very optimistic 21. And I am very grateful to be in that position. There's not that many people that can say that. But honestly, in March, I thought maybe I wouldn't have a business in June. So it's amazing, you know, what you can do and what your team can do in times of adversity, really.
You were built for the downturns, Noelle, it seems.
It seems so. I like a good recession or a good, you know, global problem. And I seem to, I have asked myself this. Yeah.
Why do it the easy way when you can try and solve it the hard way? Now, Catherine, one of the things, and it's cropped up there, from the bank point of view, when you're maybe stress testing businesses as they enter into this period and there is uncertainty, and you're maybe looking at additional costs that might eat into margin, you're probably also looking at whether or not they're doing things like enhancing their online part of their business, because it won't apply in every business in every sector, but if that's possible. Where does all of that come into play in terms of the additional costs and how that might impact profitability?
Yeah, absolutely. And we have been doing that for 4 years now. I mean, we've always stress tested business for changes in interest rates, etc. But we've been stress testing specifically for Brexit. And we share that openly with our customers. They know that we look at their cash flow and we want to see that it's not just to make sure that we don't give you too much. It's actually to make sure that you have enough, so that specific point I made earlier about being able to trade through challenges is covered, and that the businesses want to focus on the business and we focus on supplying them with the cash flow and the other services that they need. So in terms of that, we have been doing that for a long time transparently with our customers, and we're seeing it in real time, in the sense that customers who are already getting ready are already feeling those costs and building them in. And COVID, we've spoken about that. COVID has caused businesses to pivot completely. We've seen spectacularly good stories. I mean, we've seen sad ones as well about customers who've been closed and they have stock and they're trying to clear that stock out at very short notice. That's a real challenge for them, and that's unusual. That's what I would call crisis management as opposed to normal business trading. But for the most part, the people who know their business best and know those costs, they're telling us rather than us having to tell them, are the businesses themselves. And our role then is to help smooth that out. So if their costs are going up and they're in a market where they're able to adjust their prices to allow for that and they're dealing with reasonable people, and most people are reasonable, that will work through. I think where the real challenge will come in the future is when we start to see the competitive landscape change, and hopefully we won't, but if we have tariffs in some markets and not in others, then we may become less competitive and we may need to take further initiatives, not just as a bank, but as a country to support businesses through that. But I think it's really heartening to see, and it is a real positive. That description of starting to look for suppliers at home, that's not just business, that's money supply staying in Ireland that we can reinvest. That's investors looking at Ireland as a really self-sufficient growth country, and they're all really good positives that have come out of the last couple of months.
Now also from these three businesses, you know, they've talked about things like Noelle has talked about resilience in the contracts that she has that gives her a level of comfort about various things. Robin has talked about maybe being able to absorb some additional costs and building that into the price. He doesn't seem massively spooked by that. These guys have done their homework. Mm-hmm. What would you say to companies out there that have looked at the Brexit issue and maybe done a little bit and maybe thought, we don't really know what's coming, what can we do? What would your advice to them be?
I would say start now. And I would stress that, you know, your business is too precious to hope that it will go away, because it's not going to go away. There's certain things, so work on the certain things. Work on making sure that your documentation is ready. Robin already described how challenging that can be. It's challenging but manageable. And rather do it now and have the time to do it. And if you need expertise, get that expertise help rather than waiting and being in there with a melee at the end. So understand your supply chain, understand where it's coming from and where you're going to need those customs agreements. Look at your foreign exchange exposure as we discussed. That's the second big thing. Just make sure you're comfortable. That's not going to hit you hard. Thirdly, make sure that you have your cash flow in place. If you need funding, talk to your bank. And the fourth thing I would say is keep talking, keep asking questions. I mean, even if that might sound very ubiquitous, but if you're not sure what to do, a conversation with one of our Brexit advisors or somebody in a business like you that maybe isn't a direct competitor who's gone before you and can help you with that. There are huge supports out there. Take a day out. Noelle said it, one of my favorite phrases, work on your business, not in it. Take a day out, look at the websites, look at the government websites, look at ours, see what's available for you, decide what your priorities are. Taking even an hour a day for the next couple of days until you're really comfortable. I know how this is going to impact me with the certainties. I don't know whether there are going to be tariffs or not. That's for another day, and that's another cash flow. But the beauty of having everything else ready, then you're talking about quantums rather than not being ready.
Okay. So a very clear message and some sound advice there. I want to say thank you very much to our panellists. Thank you to Catherine Moroney, AIB Head of Business Banking Market, to Fiona Craul, Robin Jones and Noelle O'Connor. And I'm going to wrap up the session now, but thank you to you all. I think the message is very clear. If you haven't done the groundwork, you should make the calls, go and do it now, talk to the bank, find out as much as you can about the uncertainties and the risks if you haven't done so already in your supply chain. And don't take for granted that somehow it's all going to be all right on the 1st of January. Thank you very much for joining us.